we have a good discussion about research, security, and ethics. And the State Secretary Bart Tommelein had to leave earlier for the priority unfortunately, but collaborator will share this panel, which will do that very well, as I know her.
So, thank you very much, Jean-Marc, and welcome to this panel, which Bart was very honored to chair, but as a state secretary, he has many obligations, and I'm very happy, as far as I'm concerned, to replace him now. So let me first say a few words about Bart Tommelein's charge as a Secretary of State for Privacy. It is a Europe's premiere, if not the world's premiere, for a government to explicitly attribute to one of its members the portfolio of privacy protection. It is a major signal of the Belgian government to show its willingness to address this challenge. The challenge of protecting privacy in this new digital era. A new era where information itself has become the most important asset of a so-called knowledge-based society. So, the challenge for the State Secretary for Privacy is first to find ways to promote both privacy as well as those opportunities brought by new technologies. And as far as Bart Tommelein is concerned, he will never plead against new technologies, but he will endlessly fight to ensure those new technologies to accommodate in a way in which guarantees both privacy as fundamental rights and as well as technology as a factor of improving the well-being of every citizen. And our main concern now is to set the balance between privacy and technology, between privacy and economics, between privacy and sound governance, and last one, in line with the trend, between privacy and state security. The events of last week put a serious spotlight on the security issues. And Bart would certainly confirm that security is a matter of strong importance. And he certainly won't deny the fact that the new technologies can help authorities to enforce surveillance and security. However, it is our role and our duty to protect and to ensure that privacy will be respected as a fundamental right for every citizen. And he is fully committed to do this. As a State Secretary for Privacy, is even very glad to foresee that for every project supported by the EU research funds, to consider elements such as the ethical and the social impact of the research, and whether there is a balance between objectives and the means. It is a great deal of responsibility for the researcher who nourishes the debate with his opinion. And here is the question: can a lawyer who addresses the legal issues of a research project be accountable for the ethics of it? Technology can be legal, can respect all the laws, but does it make it ethical to use it? And on the other side of the same coin, we find the question of the responsibility for the ethics researcher. Can an ethics advisor be held accountable for all the potential uses of technology? We are about now to begin a fruitful debate which should provide sufficient food for thought for all of us. The academics who develop the projects draw both from technological and legal or ethical point of view, the politicians who have to protect citizens' privacy, as well as to promote the general interest, civil society who monitors the evolution of our so-called knowledge-based society. So this debate should help us to develop a balanced framework to approach new technologies, and especially the two surveillance technologies we are talking about today in this panel. And for it is a lost cause to deny the benefits we can all draw from technologies, and because it is a safe and innovative idea to address the ethical, the legal, and the social issues emerging from European research and development projects, Bart is truly looking forward to introduce this panel. So today we will learn more about the IPATCH project, This project is of particular interest to Bart since he is also State Secretary of the North Sea and is also particularly concerned with the maritime piracy issue. IPATCH is a project which aims to gather all sorts of data to design predictive models. Those models can be used by boats to gradually prevent piracy and avoid military solutions, as well as reduce their cost of protection. Then we will move to the P5 project, an ambitious project about to create a surveillance technology which can analyze a broad set of data related to human movements in order to provide an early detection of suspicious situations. The point of this technology is to support the human decision on when and where to intervene to protect a crucial area on a large scale like nuclear power plant or a prison. And now that the introduction is done, we all see how sensitive these technologies can be and how important it is to address the legal and the ethical issues around it. And we will be very well served with the high-level panel around this table, beginning with Mr. Franck Dumortier, legal researcher at the very well-known Fritz at the University of Namur in Belgium. Franck is specialized in privacy, data protection, and cybercriminality, and is also very involved in civil society, providing his counsel and experience to the League for Human Rights. Then we have Dr. Alain Loute. He is a lecturer and researcher both at the Catholic University of Lille in France and at the University of Namur. Alain won several prizes for his thesis in philosophy, and he is currently enriching the field of ethical research in new technologies with his experience. Then we have Professor James Ferryman, a lecturer in computer science and a member of the Computational Vision Group at the University of Reading in the UK. James has extensively written about model-based vision, visual tracking, and surveillance technologies. And finally, we have Professor Andrew A. Adams, Professor of Information Ethics and Deputy Director of the Center for Business Information Ethics, CPDP, at Meiji University in Tokyo. Andrew is a multidisciplinary researcher looking at social, legal, and ethical aspects of computer and communication technologies with a solid background on computational logic and computer mathematics. And then Jean-Marc, you are a researcher at the CRIT and specialized in data protection, e-health products and services, and a member of the Bar of Brussels. You will be our moderator for this panel.
Thank you very much. And let's start about the first speech. And Jens will be our speaker about the P5 project.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc.
And thank you very much. And maybe we have to move somehow to leave the screen clear for you.
That's okay.
Is it okay?
I'm here. I'm fine here actually.
Then you have around 12 minutes.
12 minutes. Okay. Right. Let's start. Okay. Thank you very much, Jean-Marc. Thank you very much for the introduction. I think you did a very good summary of the project actually, so I will supplement some details there. And let me just start by saying what P5 stands for. So as you can see on the screen, it's Privacy Preserving Perimeter Protection Project. I'm going to look at the background of the project and some of the current work, and also focus on establishing the key details and really the legal, social, ethical analysis which is going on in the project at the moment. Okay, let me move on. So just give you a general flavour of what the project's about. So you heard in the introductions about critical infrastructure protection. So when we say critical infrastructure, from the EU point of view, this means can be a range of different kind of utilities. It could be things like air traffic control, but typically it would be, for example, the infrastructure like nuclear power stations or other utilities, water utilities and so on. But nuclear power stations is one of the key ones. Here you see, for example, a nuclear power plant in Sweden. As we're going to see in a moment, Sweden and OKG, the nuclear provider in Sweden, are one of the beneficiaries, the end users within this particular project. So let me just play this video first, just to give you a bit of a quick insight into why the European community are interested in protecting critical infrastructure. So it's a very quick YouTube clip. You'll see, hopefully as this evolves in the next few seconds, you'll get an idea of what's going on here. Well, I don't think it takes too much guesswork to see what's going on. There are people there obviously dressed in suits, they've got ladders. In fact, you can see they're actually scaling a perimeter fence. Now, does anybody know who this is?
Greenpeace.
Greenpeace, absolutely right, 100%. So Greenpeace, okay, they're not obviously terrorists, but they are one of the targets of this kind of research because the kind of embarrassment, the types of issues that these activists create, although we can argue about the good causes and so on that they liberate, but in terms of the actual on the ground, the kind of actions they take are one of the things which these critical infrastructure operators are very, very concerned about. Of course, it's not really Greenpeace which they're so concerned about. It's really to demonstrate here that terrorists could adopt similar strategies. In fact, you could even use drones or other devices, of course, to infiltrate the perimeter fences. And of course, if they get over the fences as easily as they've done here, but use a fire truck as well in this situation with the defence, then of course you've infiltrated the infrastructure and potentially you could cause further harm. So this is a big motivation, particularly aerial platforms encroaching on the airspace, and you'd probably be surprised. There's no fly zones over this infrastructure. You can see why early detection of these kinds of incursions are important. So this is a project which is looking to develop new methods for improved protection of critical infrastructure. The project started in August 2013, so it's been going for around a year and a few months, 4 months. It was under the FP7, Framework 7 Security Programme, that was the precursor to Horizon 2020, and FOI, the Swedish Defence Research Agency, are the coordinator. So the idea is to look at early warning security systems and essentially physical protection of that critical infrastructure or critical buildings. It's a 3-year project with a demonstration, 2 demonstrations really, and the final delivery which is in the middle of next year. So the idea, more precisely, as you saw from the title, is it's a perimeter protection project because we're not just looking at critical infrastructure, you could be looking at border security, for example, as well in the widest context, for example, between the US and Mexico or in other states, European states. But generally, it's a perimeter, in essence, it's a perimeter protection problem we're looking at. And what this translates into is really essentially an outdoor surveillance problem, an automated surveillance problem. I'll talk about the sensors in a moment, but the key thing is really it's something you want to work robustly in a wide range of environmental conditions. So you're going to have cameras and other sensors which are continuously monitoring the environment around this infrastructural, essentially along the perimeter fence. But also you want to have strong privacy preserving features as well, which I'll mention more about in a moment. So the new methods to be developed in P5 or being developed now will contribute to a better security of the citizens without compromising privacy, and I'll mention more again in a moment. But of course, new innovative sensor solutions and results that will contribute to European competitiveness as well. So the focus is on the very large area outside critical infrastructure. So if we think about, look at this sort of schematic at the bottom here, we've got a contract here which hopefully will press the right button first. Oh, is that inside? There we go, brilliant. Okay, look at this schematic here. You see that generally many surveillance systems look at monitoring relatively small spaces. But here, of course, if you think about, let's say, a power station, I'm sure you're probably aware, there are generally large geographic areas, there are perimeter fences, but also usually expanses of water nearby because of for cooling purposes, and often they're in sort of forested areas as well. So you've got sort of the forested areas, you've got targets potentially on water which are nearby, you've obviously got the things like the scaling of the fences or penetration through fences, and also potentially the airborne items as well, objects as well, to be detected over a large area. So on land, in the air, and also the maritime types of areas too. So we're using different sensors. So typically we're using visual cameras, of course thermal sensors, particularly for nighttime type surveillance, using radar as well. We're also using potentially audio sensing as well for footprint or foot type detection or other noises in the atmosphere. And of course, this also requires an approach to sensor fusion as well, because none of these sensors work individually, robustly. You need to actually perform sensor fusion. And of course, that's to deal with the weather and the lighting issues that I mentioned before. So looking at combinations of those sensors, in particular the micro Doppler sensors as well, one of the partners is looking at new innovations in this sector. So we're using sensor fusion. It also helps to include, to cover larger areas, and of course higher resolution, because I'm sure many of you are aware, particularly with thermal sensing, you tend to have fairly relatively limited resolution. You have reasonably good frame rates with export high quality sensors. The resolution is still around about 640, 480 type resolution, if you're interested in that kind of resolution. So about PAL type resolution, whereas with conventional visual cameras, visible cameras, you can go to megapixel, several megapixel levels. So looking for sensor systems that automatically detect threats over larger areas with few free sightlines. The proof of concept here, so demonstrations will be held at OKG, so at the real power station, nuclear power station in Sweden. Also the critical infrastructure utility in the UK, so the Home Office are one of the partners in the, from the UK, and they will be selecting for us a suitable critical infrastructure to do a second demonstration, which may, for example, be air traffic control, or maybe one of their own sites that they've set up in the UK to simulate a real critical infrastructure location. So we want something that works effectively, is also cost effective from a sensor perspective, obviously it's practically useful and commercially useful too. Contributions technologically wise, scientifically, but also big contributions to the ethical and legal aspects as well. So what are the threats? Well, we mentioned that on land, water and air. We want to have reliable detections and alarms given all of those situations. And what are the kind of the key aspects we're looking at overall in the project? So fusion of information, sensor integration, adaptation in different environments and different kinds of scenes, and the kind of elements of the scene, the dynamic elements of people and vehicles and so on. Classification of objects. Do behavioural analysis as well, because you can't, you're doing your detection, your tracking, you're doing your behavioural recognition, and ultimately your threat detection. So the whole chain of surveillance. And of course, algorithms and methods for preserving privacy, human factors and systems design, and of course the legal, ethical, and sociological aspects as well. So I'll make a quick mention about some of the challenges here, about privacy and data protection. So this is something which has been thoroughly investigated throughout the project. So I don't want you to think it's, maybe in the past, in these kinds of projects, it's been almost an adjunct to the project. It's been a sort of an additional task that's been added on. The privacy issues here have been considered right from the beginning and addressed all the way through the project. So this means it's going from the sensor design, looking to the design of the new sensors, sensor hardware, through of course the software and the algorithms, all the way through to the dissemination as well. So this is very, very, very much an integral part of the project. We're looking particularly at system-wide privacy-preserving solutions. So these are technical solutions, of course. Maybe the algorithms, maybe for detection, blurring out, pixelating, for example, in the traditional way, objects which are not, as you remove the identity information. And of course, the access rights management as well to the system. So the goal is to make P5 employ a minimum of privacy intrusive information. So how can that be done? Well, in a lot of different ways, of course, and this is just a few to give you some ideas. So using anonymous data as long as possible in the system. If that's not enough to reach the finality of processing, the requirements, then to use coded data, okay? So you could use, for example, in a simple case, you would have direct images of people or objects. You would have bounding boxes. You have some kind of representation of those, but not the direct image of the objects themselves. And if that's not sufficient to reach the finality of the processing, then to use identified data. So there's a very, very clear process chain here for how the system design will ensure the use of the data. There's also, the project also includes pre-normative research in the form of social acceptability of surveillance technology amongst European citizens. And that includes how surveillance using different sensors is perceived. So I mentioned about the visual sensors, the thermal sensors and so on, and radar. How are those perceived by the public? And European and national legislations are also being investigated as well as part of this work, of course. And finally, to put it into context, there's also an ethical and legal advisory group, and they're the voice of the European public in this project. And that's very, very important that we hear more about that. These are the partners. Cast in the top left of the Home Office in the UK. FOI are the project leaders. IMST are a small SME involved in the radar. Then you have the University of Namur who are involved in all the social, legal and ethical aspects of the project. OKG is the Swedish operator of the critical infrastructure power stations. Reading ourselves. Safran as well. Gyseghem are involved with the architecture. Termis for the SME from Sweden who are involved with the thermal sensing and visual tools, are also involved in the processing side of the surveillance sensors. Okay, so here are a few, these are just some slides which illustrate the main points here, the main points of those institutions. I don't want to say too much more about those. Of course, I'm representing the consortium today in the sense the coordinator, and if you want to know more, then please email the coordinator, as you can see here. There's also a project website, fp5-fp7.eu, which provides quite a bit more information, but to a certain extent, of course, if you want to know something very specific about the social legal and ethical aspects, Jean-Marc is your man. Otherwise, security. Otherwise, please contact the coordinator. Okay.
Thank you very much. It was an interesting presentation speech about the project. Now we go to the IPATCH project, which is very connected with P5 because it's still privacy and security, and with the legal and ethical work behind that. It's your first years.
I'll present the IPATCH project and talk about ethics. I only have 10 minutes. I'll try to present the IPATCH project as fast as possible and then have some words about the arrangement and the planning of the ethical tasks within that project. You can see the fancy logo of IPATCH there. IPATCH stands for Intelligent Piracy Avoidance Using Threat Detection and Countermeasure Heuristics. That's the project. It goes around piracy and countermeasures against piracy, mainly in Africa, the west coast and east coast in Africa, and piracy going on. The consortium is built, it's almost the same partners as in IPATCH, except that PMT is leading the project, ITTE is working in there, also the Università Cattolica, that's a core from Italy, and then of course shipping companies that are working with us. The context is maritime piracy. Just to say that the context is maritime piracy, so we have pirates that are attacking European ships going on there. The question is not to say is it legitimate for them to do it or not. That's not the question. But Europe, of course, has interests to avoid such threats, and thus the project goes about that. They are really well organized. It's not the kids that are doing it. It's an evolving threat. You have some sheets here. So those numbers are from 2012. Almost 900 seafarers attacked by Somali pirates with firearms in 2012. That's already 87% less than 2011. Why? Because since 2011, armed guards are permitted on boats. So armed guards are shooting people there. That's why the number decreased. We had 81 seafarers on vessels boarded by Somali pirates. 249 seafarers taken hostage in 2012. 17 taken captive, kidnapped, and held for ransom ashore. The average of time in which hostages are held is 11 months. Why? Because at the East Coast, the goal of pirates is to get ransoms from the crew on the boats. And then, of course, what they do is keeping those pirates, the crew hostage to get money from it. And that's why the delay is very long, much more than at the west coast. At the west coast, you can see hostages are much less people are kidnapped, and in general they are kept only for 4 days at the west coast. Why? Because the goal of pirates there is to get the oil that is on the vessels. The main goal is not to take ransoms of the pirates. The main goal is to get the oil of it and to get ransoms from the vessels themselves. And yeah, piracy has a cost. That's a cost from a report of 2012. So of course Europe is interested by that to avoid those threats. And you see it there. It's interesting to see that the cost of private armed guards is gigantic. Another gigantic cost is insurance for kidnapping and ransom. What are the objectives of IPATCH? It's collate, consolidate, and analyze data on piracy incidents in terms of legal, ethical, social, and economic implications, to collect all data about the incidents that took place those last years, to understand how pirates are working. Second goal is to produce a manual. So there is already a manual that is produced by the IMO. The IMO is the International Maritime Organization, and they have a manual on. They give recommendations to captains on how they should react when they are attacked by pirates. And one goal of IPATCH is to update those BMP 4/5 guidelines, which poses already questions of responsibility, because I am, for example, the legal researcher in this project, and one of the outputs would be, from my side, an ethical, legal review of that manual. What can a captain do? How must a captain react when something is happening? In other words, how must a captain organize its self-defense? And it's something that is really complicated, because I think self-defense is something that cannot be regulated in a very abstract way, because self-defense is something that you have to work in very concrete situations. You cannot say beforehand to a captain, if this happened, well, react that way. It's not binaristic as that. Of course, we have to look at the whole context of it, and that's why producing a manual already is something that is not so easy to produce as a legal researcher. Third point was to produce a data set to evaluate performance of threat detection algorithms. And there, again, the last main output is to build an onboard system for the early detection, classification, and mitigation of pirate threats. And that's onboard, you see later. And then, of course, we have to demonstrate demonstrations. The IPATCH onboard system will consist of 3 elements. First, a sensor suite, incorporating surveillance capabilities of the vessel, for example, radars, IIS. IIS stands for Automatic Identification Systems. Boats can exchange information about their identities so that a vessel knows the identity of another boat when crossing it. And they want to fuse those data with advanced visual, thermal, and infrared cameras and other sensors. Second element is a threat recognition system, which fuses data from the various sensors and employs new detection, tracking, and situation awareness algorithms to give early warnings on piracy threats. So we are now collecting data about how historically attacks were taking place, and from there they are building scenarios by saying, if such a scenario happens again, well, we have lots of chances that an attack will take place, and if such an attack takes place, how can we then, third element, react? Third element is a decision support tool, which provides real-time information to the captain and crew and helps them to select the most appropriate countermeasure. There again, the legal responsibility is something a bit difficult, because we asked to make kind of a measurement of the legality of each countermeasure by saying, if this happens, we'll use this countermeasure. If this happens, we'll then use maybe this countermeasure, and so on and so on. This is the fancy illustration of the early detection tool. So we can see sensors along sides of the vessels, visual and thermal sensors can be placed has strategic eye points to cover the widest area as possible. Visual and thermal sensor can be placed in the stern to guard against attacks from behind. The system can be accessible from secure citadel. It's kind of a secure place that is used on there behind, where crew can take refuge when they are attacked. And existing ship systems such as radar and AIS will be integrated to the threat detection system. And then the countermeasures can be lots of things. It can be a razor wire, can be dummies that are placed around, can be waterfalls behind the citadel to avoid pirates to get up. But for example, the question that was asked, is this a lethal weapon or not? That's the question that was asked. It's really difficult. Everything can be a lethal weapon. If someone dies, it is a lethal weapon by definition. So how can you beforehand measure the lethality of such a thing? Not easy at all. And of course, can be armed guards. For example, it is important to know that a lot of European countries recently adopted regulations about armed guards on their boats, on the flag vessels. For example, in Belgium, they adopted a law in 2013, which was a law that was valid only for 1 year. Just recently, they extended the validity of the rule for 1 more year. But just to say that it's something really controversial. I don't know many laws that are valid only for 1 year. This is the IPATCH approach. So it's constituted of 9 working packages. Sorry, and as you can see, one of the work packages is working before legal, ethical, and societal analysis. In general, ethics in FP7 projects is becoming an essential EU requirement, and the main areas of concern, as you know, is in FP7 projects. Privacy and data protection, do your use, mission, function creep. Do your use mean is your technology also can your technology also be used by militaries, for example? Is it or not? Mission function creep is can your technology also be used for people tracking behind the purpose that was initially fixed? But the main concern, of course, is privacy and data protection. When applied that to IPATCH, you can see the main area of concern would be the privacy of pirates in a certain sense, and the privacy of employees and investors. But of course, it's not the main ethical point in such a proposal. The main ethical point is, of course, what countermeasures can be used against those pirates. Legal objectives were to ensure that data collection. Oh, I see. 2 minutes. How I see the legal objectives in IPATCH for legal research is to ensure that data collection, processing, and transfers comply with applicable rules, to ensure that technology respects privacy by design principle, ensure that demonstrations identify the DPAs, and analyze the legality of proposed countermeasures. So these are the tasks which are formally indicated in the schedule of work. And the first report was system-wide privacy was already delivered. So this is the report about privacy of pirates. What we analyze is are those cameras, are the sensors respecting the rules, and we try to minimize the data that is processed. That's what we've done. So we gave privacy by design recommendations. That was our responsibility. That's how we saw it. And then now we have to produce reports, legal analysis of the countermeasures. And this is something more difficult because we have to measure the legality of each countermeasure. This is something a bit more difficult, how to measure that. We are thinking about it now. We have to deliver that report at the end of the month, but I think we have a delay for it because January was legal. We have to think about it. It's not as easy how to measure legality in abstracto. That is the main question of it. Being a legal researcher, how to do it. And just a question to finish it. What is the legal responsibility? What is the extent of the legal responsibility of a researcher? That was an email I received in another previous report project. I just read it. So the coordinator is sending me this email. Dear X, I checked your deliverable and I have a problem with the conclusion in section 8. In section 8, you write, after having applied the European privacy and data protection principles to the above mentioned scenarios, this deliverable provides for a goal recommendation for all the proposed scenarios during the demonstrations. That's what was I wrote. if these carefully respect the privacy recommendation formulated within each scenario privacy review provided in this deliverable. So I said, my responsibility is to give recommendations, but only during the demonstrations. And the coordinator answered, as is it written, it authorizes a scenario during the demonstrations. I'm proposing to slightly modify the sentence as follows. For this reason, blah, 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 this deliverable provides for a go recommendation for all the proposed scenarios for all applications in a real, non-simulated public context. And I said to the coordinator, oh, wow, man. It means such an extension for me is completely not reasonable at all. And, but this is sometimes what coordinators are asking from us, and I think this should really be avoided, and if that's the conclusion of it.
Thank you very much, Franck. I am sure you had high pressure on you at the end of this kind of project. That's all legal issues and legal pressure we have in projects, and also when we have ethical issues. And now we go to another presentation that give another view on ethics and research and security. Give the floor.
Okay, thank you. This is Alain's. Will you have us first or first?
Do you have slides?
I don't have slides. I want to actually, given that I want to give an overview of this, because I've been involved in ethics and security projects since the early PASR project, I think it might be easier if Alain gives his reflections on P5, and then I can bring things together with an overview of this, I think.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Actually, I will just share here some general reflection on the concept of social acceptability of technologies. And since the 90s, new constraint has been included in international science policy and in European research and development projects. We refer here to the need to address the ethical, legal, and social issues raised by technological innovation and scientific research. It is, of course, the case of surveillance and security technologies projects. Human scientists are involved in this project in order to examine its ethical, legal, and social implications. Their mandate consists of assessing the social acceptability of this technology. And so the purpose of my presentation will be to clarify, to discuss this concept of social acceptability. The latter, this concept, can be understood in very different ways. So I will present different approaches and take a stand for what I will call a deliberative approach to assessing social acceptability. So 3 points, 3 sections of my speech. First, I would like to distance myself from 2 dominant paradigms of social acceptability. In a second point, in a second step, I will describe the contours of this deliberative approach. And finally, in a last point, I will extend these reflections with a proposal to institutionalize the evaluation of social acceptability approach. So first point, criticism of 2 dominant approaches. For the information deficit model, which is in the literature is known as the information deficit model, the public rejection or resistance to new scientific and technological innovations is seen as an outcome of a lack of information, understanding, or knowledge about this scientific and technological development. And for this paradigm, for this model, social acceptability boils down to a problem of public ignorance that can be solved through better communication and information to the citizens. So, in a way, the advantage of this approach is that it highlights the need to communicate the risks related to technological development. In a way, this approach acknowledges that we are entering what sociologists have called a risk society, borrowing the term from Ulrich Beck and Giddens. Although our societies are less dangerous than 100 years before, they are more risky. In a way, I mean that people developed an hypersensitivity to risk. The public demands requires
to be informed about the risk. But the limitation, the objection that we can address to this model lie in the fact that it considers that such communications and information is one way. Objective knowledge belongs to experts and politicians. Irrational and subjective knowledge belongs to the public, who has only perception and opinions about its development and its daily life. So we can address some objection to this model. Is the voice of citizens always irrational? So different number of sociologists have shown that citizens sometimes blew the whistle on risk well before the experts and politicians. I refer here to the work of Chateau Renaud and Trom, entitled Une sociologie pragmatique du risque et de l'alerte. Or I could refer also to Jürgen Habermas in Between Facts and Norms. For him, many major problems of society, including environmental issues or questions related to technological development, were put on the political agenda through the pressure of civil society. So first objection to this model. Second objection, is the voice of citizens illegitimate? And more fundamentally, I believe that there are strong ethical issues behind the choice of surveillance technologies that requires the establishment of a public debate, of a public deliberation. For example, from an ethical point of view, privacy, the concept of privacy, is a concept very difficult and challenging to define. I quote here Alain Nissenbaum, attempts to define it have been notoriously controversial and have been accused of vagueness and internal inconsistency, of being overly inclusive, excessively narrow, or insufficiently distinct from other values concepts. Moreover, the concept of privacy could evolve through time. The concept of security is also
5 minutes, please.
polysemous and controversial. So it's why, in my opinion, the definition of a trade-off between privacy and surveillance could not be resolved by a sole scientific or legal argumentation, but only through an ethical deliberation. I go through the second approach, the second dominant approach that I would like to critique, I would like to take this term from. It's what I call an utilitarian approach. For such an approach, the term social acceptability refers to aggregate forms of individual preferences. Assessment of the social acceptability consists in using quantitative methods as surveys to calculate, in a way, the degree of acceptance of the technology. And I think that we can also address strong objections to this model. The first one is that it assumes that individual preferences regarding technology are variable and calculable. Or, so in this model, the intervention of the human scientist is limited to register, in a way, to register these preferences. But is this conception applicable in technology for which there is still no controversies in societies? Can we assume that individuals already have a preference, an opinion on technology which have not yet been implemented? Second, the second shortcoming of this approach is that it assumes that, in a way, what is acceptable for the majority is acceptable for all. And we can say we are facing what we can say, following Tocqueville, the tyranny, a kind of tyranny of majority. The risk is that the norms adopted are at the expense of minority group. And we can also refer here to Ulrich Beck, who said that, I quote him, with advent of risk society, the distributional conflict over goods, income, jobs, social security, which constitute the basic conflict of classical industrial society, and led to attempt solution in the relevant institution, are covered over by the distributional conflict over bats. So, the challenge of our society is also to manage this distributional conflicts over bats. These risks are often unfairly distributed. It is important to ensure justice in the distribution of bats of risk. Second point, considering this criticism, in my opinion, the human scientist mandate is not then to making possible acceptance of the technology by the public, following the information deficit model, nor doing a market study of the degree of acceptance of the technology, following an utilitarian approach. I think that we must go beyond these two models by adopting a third way, and we must adopt a position of facilitator who helps all the stakeholders to deliberate the technology. So, so few words about how to organize the deliberation on technology. So there are different methods that make possible a deliberation on technology, quite well-known methods. I mean, consensus conferences, roundtable, focus group, citizen summit. But I will not go into detail, into a detailed discussion of this different methodology. I would only point out what are, in my view, three important dimensions of a good deliberation on the social and ethical implication of technology. The first one is upstream public engagement. It is important to organize an early public deliberation around potentially controversial science and technology. We must go beyond the approach of technology assessment of the 70s and the 80s, which distinguished the time of innovation and the time of evaluation. It is now time to intervene upstream research and technological development. The second point, the second very important dimension of deliberation and technology is what I call proactive deliberation. I mean, deliberation should not focus only on the present, but should make possible a deliberation on potential application and potential consequences, help to anticipate possible scenarios, organize a kind of anticipatory governance. Finally, ongoing normative assessment. I think it's very important to refuse to conceive ethical deliberation as a one-shot. I mean, we must support technological development by continual ethical reflection. Few words about who. I think it's important to adopt a multi-actors perspective, organizing deliberation between very different kind of stakeholders, which is representative of civil society, human scientists, public authorities, engineers, etc. Again, just a few points, few remarks. This is not to say that citizens must replace politicians or experts. I mean, to each his own. But the idea is to allow greater interaction between these actors. This dynamic should give more effective technical decision through greater exploration of dimensions of problem to solve and give more legitimacy to the technical decision. Second point, we must not close once and for all the list of stakeholders. It is also an object of inquiry. The debate can also lead to revise the definition of who is concerned by a technology. It is not a question already solved at the beginning of the reflection. And finally, the actors, of course, have different interests and agenda. Sometimes the consensus is simply impossible to achieve. But there is hope that deliberation enables a more complete definition and imaginative exploration of problem and solution. And as a conclusion, I would like just conclude with a proposal as a complement and a support for particular project evaluation procedures. It might be interesting to institutionalize a collective evaluation of the social acceptability of surveillance technologies. For example, public authorities could organize an annual roundtable, a citizen forum, or create independent observatory to centralize the feedback of the social acceptability of science and technology. I believe that the benefits of this proposal would be numerous. Allow a normative, ongoing, continuous assessment of technology, enabling a multi-actors deliberation on the social and ethical issues, centralize and crossing deliberative experiments, allowing what American scholar Charles Sebel called a mutual learning, a kind of learning by monitoring, and finally, allowing the sharing of expertise in terms of deliberative methodology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain, for this very clear explanation about your kind of work you do of such contracts and projects. And now I give the floor for the last speech. That will be a very interesting one between the crossway of.
I do thank everyone for hanging around. We're missing the concluding remarks. Please, if you feel you have to go, please do. The title of this session is the ethical responsibility of security researchers. I want to briefly talk about two aspects of this. There is the ethical responsibility of security researchers such as James, who is involved in the core production of the technologies involved in these security research projects. And then there is the ethical responsibility of people like myself and Franck and Alain, who are doing the social, legal and ethical acceptability and oversight of these projects. And generally, as Franck mentioned, there are two elements to this. I have been involved in both. I was involved, before moving to Japan, I was involved with James, where I was at the University of Reading, in a number of preparatory action for security research projects, and then a number of the early Framework 7 projects as the lead ethical researcher. And then since then I've been involved in a number of projects, including currently the IPATCH project as part of the Ethical Legal Advisory Board, or different names for the same purpose. So I want to talk about those three different elements, the obligations that the technology security researchers have and should have, the obligations and the difficulties, as Franck has already presaged, in being the legal or the ethical or the social impact researcher within these projects, and then this role that is often and not always required by the Commission of an extra level of overall evaluation outside of the project. To give you some idea of the pressures that researchers face on this, most of us working, certainly all of us up here, talk about this at the universities. These projects do also include many people working in companies. For the people working in universities, there's a pressure to bring in the research funding. And there is pressure there on not putting barriers in the way of getting the funding for these projects, and certainly from the companies, they are looking to develop systems which will be sold and make them money. And in both the ethical researchers and the technological researchers, there is a pressure to conform to the market pressures from the company partners in these projects. And that's very difficult. You know, in particular for the ethical researchers, for the technical researchers, they often want the money to do interesting technical things. And where the money comes from and what it's going to be used for, that's one of the things where they need to be aware of these things, but they need advice from people like me. And that's where it's very useful to have people like myself and James working in the same university, where I can say to him, yeah, I think maybe you shouldn't get involved in that particular project, because I think the potential outcomes from that project are, although interesting from your point of view, I think the work you will do here is potentially going to be misused. The dangers inherent in some project proposals are too great. We've had those discussions when some of these proposals came across our desks. As the ethical researcher, as the lead ethical researcher, you're actually in quite an invidious position. During the proposal writing stage, you can be very powerful because of the Commission's decisions in how Framework 7 and now Horizon 2020 operates. They made a key decision that the ethical and legal and social impact must be a key part of these projects. In fact, one of the Framework 7 projects I was involved in before moving to Japan, the Commission said to them, we really like the project, it looks really good, but you screwed up the ethics. And they came to me and they'd asked around, and they were pointed to me as a good expert in this area, and they said, okay, we need to do the ethics properly. And they actually gave up a significant amount of resource from the technical elements of the projects, because that's what the Commission had said. They said, you know, you could have asked for more money to do the ethics properly, but because you screwed it up, you're going to have to, if you want the funding for this, you're You're going to have to find the money from the technical aspects and take the hit from the rest of these things and still produce the same level of outcomes, but then fund the ethics properly to do this. So because the Commission has made this, particularly in security research, a key element that you must have this in during the development part of the proposal, the ethics researcher is actually in a fairly powerful position. But you must use that, you must be aware that you have that leverage, and you must use that to say, this must be deeply embedded in the problem. This must not be a figure. This must be having a real impact on what the project will produce. And one of the key things that I did in the projects I was involved in was to say that the goal of this should not just be to look at the ethics of this particular project, it should also be to try and embed within the design and development systems, within the companies and within the universities involved in these, an understanding of their ethical responsibilities. So that over the longer term, you actually can reduce the amount of resource that needs to go to people like Franck and Alain and myself. I'm sort of putting myself out of a job. Because we won't need to be constantly in there explaining to the researchers in computer vision or the guys doing these sensor integration developments what a PIA is and how the usage manuals need to be written to flag up the fact that yes, this can be misused, but you really shouldn't. And even embedding within the design of these systems elements which say this should not be sold for this purpose. So we should not be willing to sell some of these systems to repressive governments. You know, it should be in there. Yes, a legitimate authority in a democratic country does have a legitimate use for things like the critical infrastructure protection. On the other hand, I'm not sure I'd have been happy if Gaddafi or Mubarak had had those sorts of things protecting their presidential palaces. You know, so there is sometimes a legitimate use for these, but you've got to say there is a line on which this should not be sold. And these things can be put in early on. And you need to get buy-in from the consortium manager that they will listen to you and that these processes will be put in place and will have real impact on how the project will go. And it isn't just a fig leaf for them to say to the Commission, yes, we've done the legal analysis on this and it's all perfectly fine and legal. And again, with Alain's point, I would reiterate that social acceptability is not ticking the box to say we asked citizens and they said they were fine with this. It's about really interrogating the norms. What will this be used for? What is the outcome? Who pays the costs? How are the bads? Because all of these systems will have bads. They will have negative consequences for somebody. How will those be distributed? What ameliorations for those will be put in place? Both within the system, but also when those systems might be deployed. Sometimes you can do it within the system. You can say there are limits to what it can do. And it might technologically be able to do things, but we will deliberately stop it doing that because it's going too far. The other side is, no, you must have, when you are deploying this, you must have a thing about saying, how are you going to reduce the impact on people? So finally, I want to talk briefly about the role of the ethical legal advisory group on these things, which is to back up people like Franck. When Franck is sent that message by the consortium manager, he should be able to come to the ethical legal advisory board and say, excuse me guys, I'm a member of the consortium. You're, as the lead ethics researcher, your institution is a partner. And particularly if you've not written the proposal quite right, you have an obligation to try and see this project through to the end. And if you think the plug should be pulled on it for ethical reasons, you're in a very invidious position. Because as a consortium partner, you have a legal obligation in the consortium agreement to try and push it through to the end. But that's where the ethical legal advisory group can come in and can back up people like Franck faced with these dilemmas of being a member of the consortium, because we can then come in and say, well, no, I'm sorry, but that's an unacceptable pressure to put on the ethical advisor. And we can say, when they come out and they say, well, yes, the ethical advisor said there were these worries, but we just went ahead and did them anyway, did this development anyway. The ethical legal advisory group, who are paid by the consortium, but they are not members of the consortium. They are there as a deliberate external oversight board, and they put a very, very important check and balance on the requirement to push these projects through to the end, where sometimes these projects need to have brakes put on where they go, or even potentially they need somebody to turn around to the Commission and say, I'm sorry, the way this project has gone, actually it is becoming ethically unacceptable, and I'm sorry, we believe that this should not be put forward. It would be a very difficult thing to do, because I'm not sure if I ever did that, I don't think anyone else would ever bring me on one of these boards again. But I know that that's in my back pocket, that I would be willing to do that in the end, because I regard that as the ethical responsibility of the Legal Advisory Group, to be willing in the end to speak truth to power and to say, no, that's not acceptable, that's not ethical, or that's not going to be legally valid when you do it, and you should stop now. And even if that means pulling the plug on the whole project, you should be willing to make that recommendation. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to go to a train. I just want to say thank you, Brandon, for the presentation. Thank you for your. I just want to echo those comments about. I just want to say one thing in response to Andrew's comments. There is this ethical, legal advisory board and so on, but actually everyone here has a say in these projects too. I don't want to think that it's a constrained set of people. I'm sure that wasn't the impression you gave, but you're all involved in this. And actually, I'm sure you're saying most, Jean-Marc, there is going to be a workshop, I think it's on the 10th of March, which is looking at the legal and ethical aspects surrounding this kind of project work. And I'm sure you're all invited to this. So what I would say to you is keep an eye out on the project websites, we have the details, send emails to the coordinators, be involved. Don't just sit back and watch and listen. We want to hear your side of things as well, your input, because all of that is very valuable in this context when we go into the reports and so on. So I just want to add that again.
And if you have some question, it's one question.
Just very briefly, so you took for granted the pressure to say yes because of the money, but I work in a company that does society assessments for commission and even projects, but also for private companies. And I have pressure to say no, because if I say yes to the wrong project, I lose my reputation. If I am the societal advisor in Index, and Index ends up being exposed by anonymous, as it happened, and I was not here as a partner, then I lose my business model. The company collapses. So I have pressure to say no, and I think that we say no to around 40% of the requests that we get, both from European consortiums and private companies that just want to tick off exclusivity. But I was a bit worried because one of the things that we do, we look at privacy and data management, but we've also learned that ethics and acceptability are crucial issues in the compliance demand. But we also look at desirability. Is this project socially desirable? Do we want this to be developed? And that's what we ask ourselves when we are approached by someone. And if a project is not societally desirable, we say no. And I cannot see how IPATCH is a socially desirable project. I might have missed something, but you seem to care about the privacy of the pirates, but not their lives.
That's what. Wait, I'll ask you that. The first thing first.
But I don't want to get into it, but it's, I think you need to ask yourself that question. Is this socially desirable? And if it's not, then you need to get out, because you're risking your reputation, but also the reputation of us all. You have a collective responsibility, because if we start screwing up, the pressure there is now to get us on board will change. And there'll be pressure to get someone else who actually does the job.
That's why we rewarded the project, and to be honest, we wrote the first report about the data privacy of pirates really fast, because that was not the main point of the research. And we focus now much more on the life of pirates. This is the main point of it, of course, and this is now our work. That's why we also ask delay to the coordinator, because of course that is the main ethical point of it.
In fact, speaking as a member of the Ethical Advisory Board, it is precisely the question I asked when I was asked to be on the Ethical Advisory Board. And actually, I think it's a presentational problem. And I think Franck should take that back to the IPATCH coordinator. In fact, the point of the IPATCH project is to reduce the use of lethal force. That what we have now is that armed guards have been deployed on these ships because of a real problem. You saw there is a real problem here to be solved. The response at the moment has been to put lethal force on these boats, or on these ships, when it wasn't there before.
It's also really controversial because 2 years ago there were two Italian Marines on an Italian boat, and they shot 2 fishermen in the Indian waters. And the whole question, are those laws that are taken on the boats, on the flagging boats, are those laws valid in other lands, waters? That's controversial. And that's what, you see it, that's why I talked about the Belgian law. A law that is valid only for 1 year shows that the whole question is really, really controversial everywhere. But the whole question is now how to you have to give a legal advice about it, and you have enough time to analyze it. And that's another point I would like to talk about, is that what I think is that issue a report after we only know which countermeasure would be used after month 8, I think. We are now month 10. In 2 months we had to issue that report. That I think is not enough to produce it. That's another question. It's that sometimes when you are writing your description of work, you don't realize what you are facing directly. And it's a question of timing and so on. And in IPATCH, I think we face such a problem. The report about the analysis of the countermeasures comes far too early in the planning.
We have a question.
Sure. So implicit in what you've said is what you're interested in from an objective is establishing norms for ethically defensible cybersecurity research, right? So my question is, to what extent do you have any types of guidelines to sort of rally the community around what those principles and the application of those principles are? And then what types of sort of standardized outputs, be it, I know you mentioned privacy impact assessments, but I've worked for a number of years in the US on a Homeland Security project where we've developed guidelines for cybersecurity research, and one of the outputs also is this notion of an EIA, an ethical impact assessment, that sort of takes those principles and that's sort of a standardized way to output. So in the end, it's about getting people on the same page, a priori, and then after the fact as well in terms of your documentation and establishing, look, this is an ethically defensible thing we've done, and here's why, and it's based on these principles. So I'm wondering if you have anything like that that's guiding you, or is it more of an ad hoc?
I stress this is not cybersecurity. Most of the projects we're talking about here are real world security rather than cybersecurity. The general ethical principles that we're applying on these depend on the particular type of project. It's, some of them are very dangerous to questions of autonomy. Some of them are very dangerous to questions of discrimination. Some of them are very dangerous to questions of privacy. And it very much depends on the particular project and the particular application, but also one of the things I was pushing when I was involved in both the development of these projects and in doing them was to say, what are the potential impacts outside the core intended use? And how can we say, okay, how could this be misused? And I had a thing about what's the ethics of the use, what's the ethics of the misuse, and what's the ethics of the abuse. So the misuse is where somebody has legitimate use of the system, you've legitimately deployed it, and they use it for some other way. And abuse is where it's then changed and applied in an area that it wasn't intended to be applied. So the specifics of the ethical impact assessments are something we're still struggling with. And to a great extent, because of the range of different sorts of projects we're dealing with here, it's very difficult to come up with a single one, because they are so different in their implications. We have to go back every time to the standard set of ethical principles and see which ones are impacted potentially by this project.
You are not... You don't agree on the answer?
No. I I'm just interpreting in my mind. And I'm happy to share to maybe help you. Happy to share the model that we have used, and it's based on. I was interpreting what you were saying is the main principles we were based on is respect for persons, this notion of beneficence, which is maximizing the benefit to society and minimizing the risk to the individual or group that you're studying, respect for the law and public interest, and then this notion of fairness. And to your point, sure, they're not all going to apply equally in every situation, but that's the core set of principles that we use for every scenario. And we've developed an EA, so I'm happy to throw it over the wall, and if it's useful for you, great.
Thank you.
Any other question? We can conclude this panel and leave the floor to Charlotte to take concluding words.
Very short concluding words. Just to say that clear that law cannot create all issues off, that's for sure. But it should never be an excuse not to regulate as good as we can to embrace the case. And we are not to let the technologies abolish our fundamental rights, that's for sure. But are we not to let a marriage view of technologies to dominate our opportunities to make this world better? And that's the difficulty to find the balance between both. And it's also very clear that without the trust of the citizens, we can no go further with technology, and no technology can work and succeed without this trust. So, as reporting for State Secretary Bart, we keep listening to your experts. So thank you very much for all your input. Very interesting.
And thank you to the audience for staying.